Okay, so we will be speaking about lecture 8 and the cell cycle. And so the main takeaway from lecture 8 is 1, the different phases of the cell cycle, so G0, G1, S phase, G2, and the M phase. You need to know what characterizes each phase, the regulatory proteins of the cell cycle and P53, what are the consequences if cell fails a checkpoint. You need to know apoptosis and also cell aging. And thirdly, you need to know endogenous mutations and exogenous mutations and how the cell reacts and heals them. But in this video, I will only be speaking about lecture 8.2, so the regulatory proteins and stuff like that. Okay, so the regulatory proteins in each phase. So in G1 phase, you will have the G1 cyclin CDK, and the main function for this G1 cyclin CDK is to react to growth factors and is important for transition to S phase. And in S phase, you will have the S phase cyclin CDKs. So their main job is to activate helicases and polymerases for DNA replication. And third, and then thirdly, you will have in G2 phase, you will have the mitotic cyclin CDK, and the main function here is for the cell to go from G2 to M phase. It activates the APCC complex, and it regulates G2 and the M phase checkpoint. So it regulates. Let's say here, regulates 2 checkpoints, and it also activates the APCC complex. This one is also called, the mitotic cyclin CDK is also called maturation promoting factor, and this will be important to remember when you talk about gametogenesis. Okay. So what happens if the cell fails one of these checkpoints? Okay, so in G1 phase, so here, if the cell fails the G1 checkpoint, then what will happen is that the cell will go into arrest in the G1 phase, or it will send the cell back to G0 phase, where it will not divide but just to heal. In S phase, if the cell fails the S phase checkpoint, then replication will be put on hold in case there's a mistake, and it will be put on hold by like a cascade of signaling events until the problem is solved. In G2 phase, you will have, in G2 phase, it's also called, the G2 phase checkpoint is also really intolerant. So any mistake here, it will activate P53. We will talk about that, and it will induce apoptosis. So yeah, in case there is a mistake in the checkpoint of M phase, then there will be an arrest of the anaphase. So nothing more than that. Okay. Now, let's talk about P53. P53, put simply, it's a tumor suppressor protein, and it is activated when there's DNA damage, cell aging, and apoptosis. So when the cell is, let's say, healthy, let's say normal, there will be some levels of P53, but it will not do anything really, because P53 is just to guard the cell, to protect the cell. So when there's DNA damage or cell aging, or when the cell needs to do apoptosis, then P53 is activated, and all of that will happen. So in a normal cell, let's say, you have the mitogenic factors, so you have growth factors. Let's say you will have them in G1 phase. And so these growth factors, they give rise to the CDKs, and then the CDKs will bind to the PRBs, and then that will lead to proliferation Okay, everything is normal, everything is good. But if it will be DNA damage, then, as I said, P53 will be activated. P53 will activate P21, and as they are activated, then they will inhibit the CDK1s. And so this picture shows the same thing. If the CDK1 is inhibited, then there will not be any phosphorylation of the PRB, and then there will be cell cycle arrest. Which is good, because we don't want the cell to continue proliferating when it's, let's say, has DNA damage, for example. In another case, let's say that P53 is activated, P21 is activated, this inhibits CDK1, but for some reason the PRB is, the PRB in itself is mutated or whatever, but it's dysfunctional. So this can lead to either apoptosis or a tumor. Okay, now apoptosis. Apoptosis is programmed cell death, and it can happen in embryonic development or in an adult human. So what triggers this apoptosis is a family of proteases called caspases. So caspases, so there are two main pathways of apoptosis, this one and this one. So let's say apoptosis has two pathways. So the first one would be the extrinsic pathway. So what happens here is that you will have the killer lymphocyte, which is this one. This is the normal cell or target cell. And this is the killer lymphocyte right here. So the killer lymphocyte will deliver an external signal. They have FAS ligands. And these ligands are also called tumor necrosis factors, so TNF. So this FAS ligands will bind to death receptors on the target cell, and as they bind, then there will be the formation of the death-inducing signaling, and this leads to the cleavage of the precursor part of the procaspase. Because in order to get caspases, well, you have the precursors, so precaspase, and then the cleavage of a precaspase gives us caspase, and when caspase is activated, then it will lead to apoptosis. The exact same thing happens almost in the intrinsic pathway, only that the activation will not be by FAS ligands or the TNFs, but it will be activated by the BCL2 proteins, and they will rupture from the mitochondria. They will release a cytochrome C, and this cytochrome C binds to adaptor protein, and this leads to the aggregation of the procaspase 9, and then there will be a cleavage of this precursor, and then there will be activation of the caspase cascade, and that will lead to apoptosis. So really the only difference here is how they start and from where. So yeah, that's the difference, but kind of almost everything else is the same.